Alright, so I got some pretty major updates here for you guys on an upcoming investigation by the FBI into the assassination of the Palestinian American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed, of course, by Israeli security forces while she was trying to cover one of their raids in Jenin in the West Bank. So I got an article here from The Guardian that is basically just giving us a rundown in terms of what is happening right now. And of course, as they point out here, Israel and their government are not going to be cooperating with this investigation because, of course. So they say Israel will not cooperate with FBI inquiry into the killing of Palestinian American journalists. So they say Israel has said that it will not cooperate with the FBI investigation into the killing of the Palestinian American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by the Israeli army. They say Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, denounced the inquiry as interference in Israel's internal affairs. Okay, first of all, she was a Palestinian American journalist, so, this is something where the United States should have a direct stake in figuring out exactly what happened here and then holding the people who are responsible for it accountable, right? So he says it's an interference in Israel's internal affairs, and he said it made clear to the American representatives that we stand behind the IDF, Israeli Defense Force soldiers, that we will not cooperate with any external investigation. They say the decision of the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the unfortunate death, of Shireen Abu Akleh was a grave mistake, and the IDF conducted an independent and professional investigation, which was presented to the Americans who shared the details. Okay, so, first of all, the fact that you were saying that it was an independent and professional investigation, number one, it was a complete cover-up. You initially, which we're going to get to here in a second, lied about what actually happened. You blamed Palestinian gunfire for killing her, but, even just at a baseline, definition level, okay, an independent investigation? How is it an independent investigation if it was the Israeli security forces doing an investigation into an assassination done by the Israeli security forces? That is the complete antithesis of what an independent investigation would be. Independent would be if it was done by an outside party, right? And we've had tons of different journalist outlets and human rights groups that have done investigations into this already, which is how we know and have known for months now the details in terms of what actually went down. And they're turning around and saying this complete cover-up attempt by the government of Israel qualifies as an independent and professional investigation. It's just such a complete fucking joke at face value. But just to give you a little bit of a reminder in terms of what they were claiming at the time, right? Because of course now they've come out and admitted that in their words it was likely gunfire that came from an Israeli sniper that killed her. But of course it's not just likely, it is 100%. There was, according to all of the investigations that were done, even by some human rights groups like B'Tselem within Israel itself, all of the evidence on the ground was showing that it literally would not have even been physically possible for this to have been Palestinian gunfire. The Palestinian militants were in a completely different area than Shireen was, and there was no battle that was going on at the time, okay? There was no possible chance that this was anybody other than this Israeli sniper, and on top of them just killing her, right? It's, in all likelihood, you could say confidently that not only did they kill her, but they likely knew that she was press, because of course at the time she was wearing a helmet that said press on it, a flak jacket that said press on it, clearly identifying themselves. And even when she was shot, they were trying to make an attempt because they knew the Israeli forces were down this corridor where they were, and they tried to go out into the open, present themselves so they could be easily seen and identified as journalists. So not only could you say that they definitely killed her, but you could also confidently say that they knew that she was a journalist, and maybe even, you could confidently say that they knew that it was specifically this world-renowned Palestinian American journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, and that they targeted her, okay? So that's actually what the evidence indicates, but what did they end up actually coming out and saying about this? So they say the Israeli army on Monday acknowledged for the first time that Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian-American journalist killed in May in the occupied West Bank, was most likely shot by an Israeli soldier, but it stopped short of definitively accepting responsibility for her death. They say the army's announcement, the conclusion of a months-long internal investigation, marked a shift from the original Israeli position, which maintained that Miss Abu Akleh, a veteran broadcaster for Al Jazeera, had probably been killed by Palestinian gunfire. Okay, so this is what they always say whenever there is some sort of a controversial death or a killing of a Palestinian, they always tend to just in a reactionary knee-jerk way blame it on Palestinian gunfire, right? But I mean, again, the evidence on the ground clearly indicated that that would not have even been physically possible, right? So they initially tried to blame Palestinian gunfire, then they turn around and they say, okay, since all of the evidence and all of these human rights groups and all of these journalistic outlets are saying that that doesn't match up with reality, okay, fine, we'll admit that it was possibly, maybe, an Israeli soldier who shot the bullets, and but from there we're not actually going to hold anybody accountable. They say military officials nevertheless said that they were certain that no Israeli soldier had intentionally fired towards a reporter or civilian. Then who the fuck were you firing at? They say, and they said that they would not open a criminal investigation into any Israeli soldier who might have been involved. Okay, so again, go back to what he was saying here. The IDF conducted an independent and professional investigation into their own crimes, right? I mean, this is like, that old CIA article in the New York Times from years ago where they say, the CIA has investigated itself and concluded that they had nothing to do with the proliferation of cocaine around the United States, right? I mean, it's like you can't do an investigation into your own organization or your own security forces and expect people to believe that that's independent and professional. But again, I mean, they're coming back here and saying that they are not going to open a criminal investigation into the soldiers. Okay, so what is it? Is it a independent and professional and thorough investigation, or are you just not doing an actual criminal investigation? You just want to cover this up and not hold anybody accountable. But they finish here with a quote saying, "It is not possible to unequivocally determine the source of the gunfire which hit Miss Abu Akla." Yes, it is. I mean, that's just a complete fucking lie. The Israeli Defense Forces said in a statement. However, there is a high probability that Miss Abu Akla was accidentally hit by IDF gunfire that was fired towards suspects identified as armed Palestinian gunmen during an exchange of fire in which life-risking, widespread, and indiscriminate shots were fired towards IDF soldiers. This entire statement that they just put out is a complete bald-faced lie. Okay, I mean, we could just break this down. Accidentally hit. First of all, accidentally hit. Okay, this wasn't errant gunfire that was being sprayed around in the middle of a battle. Okay, this was a sniper bullet. Okay, multiple sniper bullets that were fired directly at her, and the one that killed her, I think, either struck her in like the lower part of her head or in her neck, and that's what ended up killing her. Right? Okay, you had to have a sniper who was looking down a scope and could easily have seen that she was wearing a press jacket with a flak jacket that says press marked on it and wearing a helmet that says that she is a journalist. You're telling me that that was accidental. Okay, but then beyond that, right, they say that it was accidental gunfire that was fired towards suspects identified as armed Palestinian gunmen. Where? There were no, I mean, we've seen all of the investigations into this, all of the evidence on the ground, and what it was indicating. There were no Palestinian militant fighters where Shireen Abu Akla and her crew were at the time. Zero. Okay, so this idea that like they were just returning fire from, these life-risking, widespread, and indiscriminate shots fired towards the IDF soldiers and they were firing back, it's just completely made up. They just straight up lied about this. So again, I mean, the idea that, they did this independent and professional investigation and that nothing else needs to be done about it, it's just completely fucking ridiculous if you actually look at what happened at the time on the ground according to all of the evidence that we have at our disposal. But they continue here, saying that an outright failure to cooperate would complicate relations with Washington and reinforce claims of an Israeli cover-up of Abu Akla's death, as she reported on a military raid in the West Bank city of Jenin back in May. They say the FBI investigation comes after months of pressure from the highly respected Al Jazeera journalist's family, who has accused the Biden administration of skulking towards the erasure of any wrongdoing by Israeli forces. The family was backed by dozens of members of Congress. They say Abu Akla's family praised the U.S. decision on Tuesday, saying this is an important step, said a statement that voiced hope for a truly independent, credible, and thorough probe. I'm going to be honest, I kind of have my doubts that the United States is actually going to do, a legitimate investigation that, would indicate that there should be some accountability for the people responsible. Obviously, the United States looks the other way in pretty much every single instance of whether it's Israeli apartheid or, a violence in the raids that they are conducting, like the one that they were doing in Jenin in the West Bank at the time, which again is illegally occupied, and, looking the other way at the expansion of settlements and looking the other way in terms of the bombing campaigns in Gaza. I mean, mean, brazen war crimes that are just completely overlooked by the U.S. government. So kind of gives me a little bit of a hesitancy in assuming that they are going to do a real independent and thorough investigation that comes to the correct conclusion in this instance. But I mean, you could make an argument that it's more likely that they may do that because of the fact that this was a, such a high profile, well-respected Palestinian American journalist, right? I mean, that's a key part here. If this was just, somebody who didn't have any affiliation with the United States or with Al Jazeera or, some other major news outlet, then, they probably wouldn't have even thought it was necessary to really discuss this in any meaningful capacity. But there's definitely been a lot of pressure that Abu Akla's family, as well as some members of Congress, have successfully put on the Biden administration. But it shouldn't have taken this long. I mean, again, they're praising them for this decision, but I mean, this is months late, and it's the bare fucking minimum. I mean, let's be real about it. This is something where we knew basically the entirety of the evidence and what actually happened on the ground within a couple days of this actually happening. So, I mean, again, just a little bit late here to the party from the Biden administration, but they finish off here saying that it is what the United States should do when a U.S. citizen is killed abroad, especially when they were killed like Shireen by a foreign military. So again, 100% correct there. And, again, I mean, I have my hesitancies in terms of like what this investigation is actually going to output. I mean, we saw how the United States under the Trump administration and then under the Biden administration as well, refusing to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for the killing and dismembering of Jamal Khashoggi, a Washington Post journalist. So, I mean, again, these types of situations usually don't play out where anybody is actually going to be held accountable. I mean, the United States military doesn't even hold our own war criminals accountable, let alone, criminals or war crimes or assassinations like this from other closely allied governments that we pretty much never criticize in any way, shape, or form. So again, have my doubts on that. But I'm going to move on here to a couple different articles just to give you a little bit more background in terms of what actually happened and what the evidence was indicating. Because again, it's not just that they killed this journalist and it, was in some crazy situation where she was in the middle of a gun battle and maybe she accidentally got hit. No, I mean, according to the UN report that we got on this, they say that Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by seemingly well-aimed Israeli bullets. Okay, so again, it's a sniper, right? We're not talking about an active battlefield where, there's crossfire everywhere and anything could have happened. This was sniper bullets, okay? And sniper bullets where Shireen Abu Akleh and her crew were basically the only people in the area and were trying to mark themselves, to identify themselves as journalists to the Israeli security forces, who then just proceeded to open fire on them. And we also had different investigations that were done by other human rights groups. Here from The Intercept, they say, Israeli forces deliberately killed Palestinian American journalist, report shows. So they say that Palestinian American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed by Israeli forces in May while reporting from the occupied West Bank city of Jenin, was deliberately and repeatedly targeted along with her colleagues despite being clearly identified as a member of the press. A new report on Tuesday concludes, and this was a report that was a collaboration between Palestinian human rights groups Al-Haq and the UK-based research agency Forensic Architecture, and it confirms the findings of half a dozen earlier independent reviews of the incident, including by the United Nations, which we just looked at, which have found that Israeli forces were responsible for Abu Akleh's killing, with the UN noting that the bullets were well aimed, again, as we just discussed. And I mean, again, it wasn't even bad enough that they ended up killing Shireen and shooting one of her colleagues as well. I think it was their cameraman that was there with them. He got shot in the back as well. But then on top of that, I mean, just to emphasize the brutality of this entire situation and how little the Israeli security forces give a single solitary shit about Palestinian lives like this being lost. I mean, after she was killed and when Palestinians were trying to do a funeral procession and to mourn her death, the Israeli police attacked the funeral. Right? I mean, we watched the clips on this on my channel back a couple months ago when I was first covering this story. I mean, they literally went up and just completely unprovoked started brutalizing these people who were carrying a coffin, right? I mean, they almost dropped the fucking coffin while these people were being beaten. I mean, just the most grotesque and inhumane shit that you could possibly imagine. But I mean, there's our update. Again, I'll keep you guys posted in terms of what this report actually ends up concluding. Again, have my doubts that it is going to do anything super aggressive or definitive and calling out the Israeli government for this. And on top of that, you have the added context, which I didn't actually get to cover on my channel, that Israel recently had their elections again, and it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu is making a return, and that the current government that they have just elected is going to be even more far right-wing than the previous governments that have been in power, which is saying a lot because, again, this is an apartheid state that is conducting essentially a ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people that commits war crimes on a regular and widespread basis, and it looks like it's only going to get worse from here. So, I mean, again, the end result of what this investigation is going to say. That's not necessarily going to be the end of the story in terms of fixing the current situation in Israel and our relationship to this country. I mean, this is a country where we give essentially billions of dollars every single year in unchecked aid and weaponry to go continue doing these types of things to Palestinian people. And, that's the relationship that we have maintained with Israel. Again, it's similar to the relationships that we have with other brutal governments around the world, whether it's Saudi Arabia or the UAE, which I just talked about in one of my videos yesterday. The United States just has this tendency to, support a lot of these far-right, semi-fascist or dictatorial or apartheid governments around the world. And, at the end of the day, again, the lesson here is that from a policy perspective, what we should be doing is at least starting to condition the aid that we give to Israel on a regular basis and, use our diplomatic pressure, use our relationship and the ties that they have with us in order to pressure them to end, their apartheid policies, to end the continued brutalization of Palestinian people, the killing of journalists like Shireen Abu Akleh, the continued expansion of the illegal settlements into the West Bank, the continued bombing of Gaza every couple of months or years, using our pressure to the fullest extent possible in order to, prevent these types of atrocities like what happened to Shireen from happening again in the future.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying